You've played every Mario game. You've conquered every Mario game. You think you've mastered all there is to know about Mario. Well, you better think again.
By 1994, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System was entering its third year on the North American scene. It was enjoying immense success, although parents were still grappling with the concept that it couldn't play your old Nintendo tapes. Loads of classic games had been released by this point, and developers were figuring out how to maximize the hardware and how to maximize the console. Today we want to focus on a year that was epic. Was it the best year on the console? That is always up for debate. The Super Nintendo was in a battle with its rival Sega and was pulling no punches in 1994. In today's episode, we want to take a look at 1994 on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
Now you're playing with power. Superpower.
It's Super Nintendo time, and more to the point, it is time to talk about 1994 on the Super Nintendo. It was an amazing time to be a gamer, an amazing time to be alive. So many great, iconic games came out in 1994, and this is the second installment of this series. The last episode we did, we focused on 1990 on the NES. Really having a good time with this, diving into what we think is the best year that a console ever had.
Yeah, and I think 94 in North America was one of the best years for the Super Nintendo. 3 years into the North American release, a lot of amazing games. I was born this year, so I wasn't playing Super Nintendo, but I've grown up and played Super Nintendo a ton. I love this console. The controller's amazing. Dude, so many iconic games came out in 1994.
Yeah.
Let's jump into the games because that's going to be the majority of this episode.
For sure.
We're going to do this chronologically like we did in the NES episode. The first game to come out that's like a dinger, that should be talked about, Mega Man X. This came out in January of 1994. You ever heard of it?
Yeah, it's a fantastic Mega Man game, and it was kind of a shift in focus for the series, right? You know, we had, 5 games, 6 games? We have 6. We have 6. I'm missing 5, but there is 6 on the NES, and then we shift into Mega Man X. And what is this? It was like the next generation of Mega Man. It's on the Super Nintendo Classic Edition. It's that great.
Which is pretty cool. They're like, wow, this game is so important to the Super Nintendo. Let's put it on the Classic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and they've done Mega Man X collections. Like, this is a series. It was the beginning of the X series, but the X series has so many installments. Mega Man Universe gets kind of confusing. But they're still paying homage to this era of Mega Man, and it started on the Super
Nintendo in 1994. Then the next game we got to talk about, this was released on other consoles obviously, but it's one of our favorite games. January 1994, NBA Jam released.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
Yeah, you're not going to hear a lot of third-party stuff in this episode. It's a lot of console exclusives, but this really is an important one to point out. This game was on fire, no pun intended, in the arcades. And we get a home console port, and you also got it on the Genesis. Now, I am a Super Nintendo guy. Love the Genesis, but I lean ever so slightly towards the Super Nintendo. But I do think Genesis overall was better for sports games, but not NBA Jam. And it's all about the controller.
Yes.
Who wants to be like shooting, passing, and turbo on a 3?
How are you supposed to do that with one thumb?
Dude, NBA Jam on the Genesis, it looks great, sounds great. We can debate that stuff all day long, but from a controller standpoint, having those shoulder buttons is how the game needs to be played on a home console. And in my humble opinion, NBA Jam in this era was either the options were the arcade or the Super Nintendo.
Oh, the Genesis doesn't even count. That game is fantastic. And now moving on to another weird release for the Super Nintendo, but it's super important to us as light gun fans.
Yeah.
Konami released a game in 1994 for the Super Nintendo called Lethal Enforcers, which is pretty freaking badass, and we'll talk about it later, but with the release of this comes the Justifier.
Yeah.
So light gun games at home on the Super Nintendo, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's few and far between on the Super Nintendo for light gun games. I mean, obviously, years prior, we had the Super Scope, but whatever. Probably the best offering for a light gun game, in my opinion, on the console. It also did get released on the Genesis, but I just think this was a monumental time. And that's, again, why we're talking about a few third-party games that we think were a big deal. I had a neighbor up the road that had this. He had the red gun or the orange gun or the blue gun.
And you were like, holy shit.
It was so cool. It wasn't a one-to-one arcade port. If you can play the arcade version, on an emulation box or whatever, don't go play the Super Nintendo one. But at the time...
you're like, this is like an upgrade from Duck Hunt?
Yeah.
You're like, holy shit, this is badass. And then we're going to skip to March of 1994 with Ken Griffey Jr.'s Major League Baseball. This is a badass deal because this is like Nintendo's new celebrity icon.
Yeah.
You know, they had Mike Tyson
Yep.
in the 90s or the early 90s, and that didn't go very well.
Well, I guess it went very well.
It went very well for a while, and then,
Yeah.
you know, Mike Tyson was Mike Tyson. And then so they cut ties with him, and now they got Ken Griffey Jr.
Yeah.
Dude, this was a big deal. Marketing was pushing him so much, and this game
Yeah.
so far.
Well, and it went so well that they carried this relationship well into the N64 era,
Yeah.
which also saw a couple releases. You got a couple releases on the Super Nintendo. But this game really stands out because this game was a part of something bigger that we'll talk about later in this
Yes.
episode. And this game has staying power. There are still people in the modding community or whatever you want to call it that are releasing hacks of this game with updated rosters or like all of the legends,
Yeah.
if you will.
Which speaks to how good the core game is.
Yeah.
You know, people are doing that with like Tecmo Bowl and all that stuff. Like, it just shows like how good this game is. And then another game.
Well,
oh.
I also want to mention on this, the staying power, there are a lot of people that'll say, man, if I only could take 5 SNES games to an island, that would be one of them, because you can play season after season after season.
Oh, it doesn't end.
Yeah,
It's
and
infinite.
the game has a weird way on the difficulty curve. Like, you're not going to win every game, no matter how good you are. This game will find a way, so it keeps it competitive.
That's nice. Yeah.
If there was a baseball game that you had to play on the Super Nintendo, it's this one. And they even released console box variants with this game on the cover. I think it was a Kmart exclusive. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Could have been Target. Who knows? But really awesome.
Hey Cito, could this game be any more real?
I don't think so.
Could this game be any faster?
I don't think so.
Could this game be any more fun?
I don't think so.
Could Ken Griffey Jr. win the series?
I don't think so.
Ken Griffey Jr. presents Major League Baseball, only on Super Nintendo.
And then another game that came out in March. We're only bringing this up because it affects us and we love this game. And that's Chester Cheetah Wild Wild Quest. We did a video about this game a long time ago. Check it out if you want to. It's hilarious. This game is fine, but we love it.
It's actually dog shit.
Yeah.
But
It's a big deal to us.
it is, and it was a game that when we went into that episode, it's like we were going to beat this no matter what. So I have this fondness for it. And there was a lot of weird licensed games. This may be one of the weirdest. I know there's the 7-Up Dot game, and I do think some of these games, the Chester Cheetah games, got released on the Genesis. Haven't played those to be able to compare them. I'm guessing it's the same shit.
Yeah.
And it's shit, but it's fun shit.
I don't know.
We weren't gonna put this in this episode, but it had to be in this.
It had to be in
episode.
this episode because it has history for our channel.
Yeah.
So we had to talk about it. This is a game that frustrated me that I tapped out, but you beat it, and I was there when he beat it. So
Yeah.
we had to talk about it. But now let's move on to a staple. This is April of 1994, Super Metroid.
Yeah.
Holy shit, this game is so iconic. It's on the Super Nintendo Classic, and it's on the Super Nintendo Switch app. Metroid is a phenomenal series, and this game is incredible.
Yeah, and I think this is a big one. I mean, this is one that really helps for me drive 94 up to the top. And there's a lot of great years on the Super Nintendo. But Super Metroid, man, the NES version is fantastic. There's been some other great entries, you know, even if you roll in Metroid Prime into this. But I was thinking Metroid Dread, you know, on the Switch is so fantastic.
Oh, it's a great game.
All these years have passed, and I still think the King of the Castle is Super Metroid. That
Yeah.
game is so damn good.
And when it
It's
came
so
out,
good.
you were like, holy shit.
I remember when the SNES Classic came out. I've played the game so many times that I was like, I'm beating it.
Yep.
I'm gonna beat it on this. Then it goes onto the Switch, and I'm like, I'm gonna play it again on this. I love the game. They really, really, really took what they did on the NES, and it felt like, holy cow, man.
It felt like a game changer.
It is. It's one of the best games on the console, and they've highlighted it in every which way they can.
Before Nintendo came out with Super Metroid, we wanted to make sure it was the most intense Metroid battle ever. So we thought we'd see how Killer here would fare against it. Ready, boys? That's 24 megs worth of weapons, worlds, and weirdos old Killer's up against. Nintendo's biggest game ever. But he's a big boy. He can handle it. Well, let's see how he did. Ship it! Super Metroid, only on the Super NES.
And now moving on to another game that came out in April, Joe and Mac 2, Lost in the Tropics. This game is available on the Super Nintendo Switch app, which is pretty cool. This is a pretty cool game if you're just into like platformers and stuff.
Yeah.
I really like the art style. This series and this game in particular feels a lot like a Sega game. but it's on the Super Nintendo, so that's kind of cool, you know?
Yeah, I've always thought the Joe and Matt games were really beautiful, and there's a string of nostalgia there. Not with the second one, the first one. My brother and I used to rent that game. But the second one's really good, and the fact that they put it on the Switch means somebody thinks it's really good. I think it's just a beautiful game, and, you know, they've got a little minecart level in there. You know, and then you're riding on dinosaurs. It's a pretty cool game, and it's just
very 90s.
One of many good to great titles in '94.
And now we're gonna kind of take a massive leap in months, because we're just talking about the dingers.
Yeah.
We're gonna jump to August of '94. You're like, holy shit, from April to August? Yeah, August '94. R-Type 3.
Yeah.
We love our shmups, and the R-Type franchise is incredible. The third one is incredible. Super Nintendo, fantastic entry.
Yeah, it doesn't run the best per se on the console, and if you had to say what console was better for shooters, the Genesis takes it all day long. But there are a few that stand out on the Super Nintendo. R-Type 3 is one of them.
R-Type 3.
And if you're a fan of R-Type, you gotta play it.
You gotta play it.
We got two of them on the Super Nintendo: Super R-Type and R-Type 3.
R-Type 3, which is badass. And then another game that was released in August. I'm not a big RPG fan, but if you are, you'll love this game. Breath of Fire. This game is so good. It's on the Super Nintendo Switch app.
Yeah.
Like, the cover's iconic, and I know a lot of people talk about this game.
Yeah, huge series, and I was an RPG guy back in this era, and Breath of Fire is one that just missed me. I was into Secret of Mana and Earthbound and Final Fantasy III. Didn't get to Breath of Fire. Wish I had. Maybe someday I will when I have more time. It maybe sounds like a great retirement game
when
to
you
treat
retire,
myself to it. Don't have the time to go back to that, but pretty cool game.
Yeah, and then we're going to jump to September with another RPG, Illusion of Gaia. Hopefully I said that right. This is an action RPG.
Yeah.
This is another iconic cover. I know the cover, but I've never played the game because I'm not an RPG guy.
Yeah.
But the cover, I bet most people will recognize the cover.
Yeah, it's a staple, I think, on the console. People love when we say staple. I see that boy in the comment section. So that was for you, pal. I hate getting salty, but it's easy for me to do. Yeah. But this is another one. Have not played this, but I do think, to your point, this is a game that a lot of people talk about.
Yep.
We don't. But it is worth noting because it was a big release.
And then the next game we're going to talk about, it's probably the best in this genre of games, but it's kind of weird, but we're going to talk about it anyway. And that's Saturday Night Slam Masters.
Yeah.
If you like wrestling, this is probably one of the best from the era.
Yeah, if you like slamming dudes.
If you like slamming dudes back in high school,
yeah,
this is the game for you.
Yeah.
Big release, kind of.
I think it is. There were some games that, from WWF, etc., that had just some nostalgia that, God, if I even turn them on, the nostalgia just spikes.
Yeah.
But the games are not very good. This game's still playable and still really fun to this day. I think it is the best wrestling game on the console, and that's not saying a lot. I guess I should not forget about the Fire Pro games, but
yeah, but that's their own subgenre.
Yeah.
Because Fire Pro is more technical wrestling.
Yeah, for sure.
And now moving on to another September release in 1994, one of your favorite franchises of all time.
Yep.
Super Punch-Out. Another game that's on the Super Nintendo Classic and on the Super Nintendo Switch app. Super Punch-Out, iconic, one of the top SNES games.
Yeah, and this one is a game that I guess I would say I can confirm how great it is. Because there's no nostalgia for me with this game. I didn't like this game as a kid.
You did not.
I revisited it because a good friend said, dude, you really need to put your time into this game because it's fantastic, and it is. No nostalgia. The game is just fantastic.
It's a great
and
game.
it's not as good as Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, but it's right freaking there, man. It is a fantastic game. So fun to play. So challenging. So many different ways you can, do the fights. And it's definitely a game that if I just have, 30, 40 minutes to burn, I'm probably putting in Super Punch-Out.
Well,
I love
and
it.
you've done a no death run.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know everything about the game. I feel like there's definitely better people at it than I.
But it's pretty wild. You didn't play it at all growing up, and then over the past couple of years, that you're like, okay, I know it so well.
Yeah,
yeah. That just proves how great the game is. And now we're gonna jump to a game that's not very great, but it is really it's all right. And that's Stunt Racer FX, a 3D cartoon racer. It's all right.
Well, I mean, it uses that chip, and I think they did a pretty good job with it. It still gets talked about to this day.
Yeah, people talk about it.
This game, I wouldn't say it's a bad game by any means. I think it's worth being in this episode, but you're going to play Mario Kart or F-Zero way before you get to this.
Yeah. But, I mean, this game is on the SNES Switch app, so people still like it because it's a different type of race.
Yeah, there's certain games I feel like that if you've just played the knobs off of games like Mario Kart and F-Zero, and you still want to try something different. This game's it's close. It's just not quite in their league.
It's not quite. I'm sure
Yeah.
when it came out, it was a big deal. I didn't play it when it came out, obviously, but
Yeah.
it's all right.
Right, a big one here. Probably one of the most iconic RPGs from the era.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy III.
Yes.
I know the numbers in North America don't align with everywhere else in the world, but Final Fantasy III here, just an epic game, man, and it's going to keep getting attention. You know, they even just released the pixel art collection, or pixel collection of Final Fantasy.
Oh, did they? Really?
Yeah, I mean, Final Fantasy is just...
It's one of the biggest. Yeah, one of the biggest franchises
Yeah,
ever.
yeah.
Final Fantasy III, incredible entry on the Super Nintendo.
Yep.
Again, not a big RPG fan, but this game is so important to the Super Nintendo that it's on the Super Nintendo Classic.
Yeah.
And at the end, I'll tell you how many are on the Super Nintendo Classic. There's a decent amount. There's only 21 games on the Super Nintendo Classic. Final Fantasy III, iconic.
Yeah, and then we had a run of what I would call pretty solid Star Wars entries on the Super Nintendo.
Yes.
One in particular, only one was released this year, but Super Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Man, I don't know. I think nostalgia makes me say Super Star Wars is the game I like the most, but this game is really freaking good.
This game
man.
is really cool. I like how there's different characters.
It's hard.
It's hard. I love that. It's if you played one of them, you've played all of them. They're all they're built on the same engine, I think. But if you're a fan of Star Wars, they're really cool because you got the music, it's just a great freaking.
I do like this one with the flying aspect, like to
that's
get
true.
to different.
Yeah, that's true. You got
It's not. It feels tacked on and
but it
unnecessary.
kind of reminds me of Mario Kart and F-Zero.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of cool. And then another game that was released in October, Sparkster. You ever heard of this game? Have you ever heard of Rocket Knight Adventures on the Genesis? This is that game, but it's not.
It's the sequel.
It's the sequel,
Yeah.
and this is the only Nintendo version from this franchise.
Yeah.
All the other games in this franchise are Sega only. So I don't know why this one got released, but it was released in 1994 in North America on the Super Nintendo. And if you're a fan of Rocket Knight Adventure, you'll feel right at home with this game.
Yeah, and the Genesis also got... It was such a weird time. They also got a sequel, if you will, but they're slightly different.
Yeah, they also got a Sparkster game.
Yeah.
But it's not the same game. It's a different game that has similarities. It's weird.
It was cool. This is definitely the era where you can't just look at the title of games. The version on each console could be completely...
Yeah, and there's a game coming up on our list that's just like that.
Yeah.
You know, there's a version with the same title. And now moving on to November, this game is available on the SNES Switch app, Demon's Crest. Oh,
Yeah.
This game is great.
You know, I think for a lot of years, probably early YouTube days, everybody knows about Demon's Crest now, but I think this was kind of, for people, like one of those hidden gems, because they kind of have been really weird with this series on the titles of the games.
Yeah.
You know, it was Gargoyle's Quest. It was kind of the title, but this is your boy Creston.
Yeah, dude. That's not his real name, but I call him Creston because he's just a cutie boy. This game is really cool. It takes a little bit to learn the controls.
Yep.
The controls are a little bit complicated, but once you get the controls down, this game is fantastic.
Yeah, I think one thing that maybe is a barrier of entry on this is the overworld map and understanding how that
Yes,
works.
because you fly. Yeah, it's kind of confusing.
And I don't think people realize you can hit a button to get a different view and kind of realize where you
It
need.
took me forever to
Yeah.
realize that.
But you get past that. Fantastic game. It's an icon. It definitely is. It's gone up there in price, probably for a reason. And I think it was lesser known way back in the day. Everybody knows about it now, of course. But
The next thing we're going to talk about is we're just going to mention it real quick and then move on to the next one. But WWF Raw came out. Another wrestling game. If you like WWF and WWE, this game is fantastic for nostalgia purposes.
Yeah.
It's not fantastic gameplay-wise.
No.
Not a great game, but wrestlers, music, all that stuff's fantastic.
yeah, this is a game when your friends got this back in the day. I mean, you know, when the character select screen has theme song.
Oh, dude.
It's
It's
huge,
cool.
dude. Just the intro of this game gets my heart freaking pumping. It's got that old school Raw music. But to your point, when you get into the game, I mean, back in the day it was cool,
Yeah.
but it's got that tug of war grapple system, and it is fun if you learn it to the point where you can like figure out how to pull off finishers with people and stuff. But the game, it's
No.
just the hitboxes suck ass. But it was cool.
I think the coolest part of the game in 2023 is the intro.
Yeah.
and then once the game starts, you can shut it off.
Yeah, go play a different wrestling
Yeah,
game.
play a different wrestling game. But now moving on to an iconic release in November of '94 in North America, Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah.
One of the best Super Nintendo games ever released. It's on the Super Nintendo Classic and on the Super Nintendo Switch app. Started a freaking franchise that's still running strong today.
Yeah.
This game is incredible.
Yeah, up until this, Donkey Kong was the arcade guy throwing the barrels down that Mario was, but now he's got his own,
Yeah, you used to
adventure.
think of like Donkey Kong as like being like the bad guy.
Yeah.
And now you're like, oh, I get to play as him? That's
yeah,
pretty cool.
graphically, this probably pushed the system to the max. I remember seeing it when I was younger and just my mind literally thinking graphics will never look better than this. The music to this day is my favorite video game soundtrack of all time. Aquatic Ambience is the best video game song
and also
ever, I feel like.
the water physics when you're it's so cool.
Yeah, and it's weird. I've heard some people in recent months and stuff like come out and say that this shit's overrated and that. Like, you're on crack, dude. This game is so freaking good, and it's my favorite Super Nintendo box variant.
Oh yeah.
Why? I don't know, because it's badass and it was the one that I got. So
that's
probably part of it. But we talked about Super Metroid being a game that really pushed 94. This game really pushes 94.
Yeah, this is a revolutionary game for the Super Nintendo.
Simply mind-blowing. Best-looking video game, period. Spectacular. The best game out there. 100, 100, 100. A plus. A step up from the rest. A classic. You can stop rubbing your eyes. As good as the hype. The best graphics ever on the RC. Whoa.
The next game isn't, but it's still cool, and it's still cool to mention. Game also came out in November. That's Ghoul Patrol.
Yeah.
You ever played Zombies Ate My Neighbors? This is the sequel.
And this is weird. Why were companies doing this, guys? I don't know. Why do you not release Zombies Ate My Neighbors 2?
Yeah, because you see the title, you're not going to know it's related. And the first one did amazing.
And can I make an argument that Zombies Ate My Neighbors, a lot of people had that game. A lot of my friends had that game. Why were you confusing people? This game's really badass, so I like this game a lot.
I think it's an awesome game, but I think it just got lost in the shuffle because people were confused by it. They were like, what is this?
Yeah, it still's getting some love today. They actually just did a limited run, re-release of this game, I believe. Maybe it wasn't limited run. I can't remember who did it. But it got reprinted on a Super Nintendo cartridge, the whole nine. It's got a following. Yeah. I don't know why they called it Ghoul Patrol.
I don't know. I mean, that's a really cool title, but if you already have an established don't change the name.
Maybe call it Ghoul Patrol Zombies Ate My Neighbors 2 or Zombies Ate My Neighbors Ghoul Patrol. Yeah.
Something to make I don't know. Very weird.
All right, November. Michael Jordan, Chaos in the Windy City. Is this the best game you've ever played? No. But it has to be on our list because this game, we really, really like it. This game, God, it's got some problems.
Yes.
But I love this game. I loved this game as a kid. I love it now. It's got some flaws.
But, dude, so it's Super Nintendo exclusive, which is badass, but it's Michael Jordan, platformer, and you dunk basketballs.
And throw basketballs at people. Dude, it's awesome.
It's a very weird, very 90s specific style of game.
Yeah.
But I remember, this was back, we played this game back when we were streaming on Twitch.
Yeah.
Which was, a long time ago.
Yeah.
But this game was so fun. We never beat it. We need to get back to it.
Yeah,
but
so
this game is so fun.
In this game, I guess I would say I would maybe put this in the playing field of Michael Jackson's Moonwalker on the Genesis.
Dude, Moonwalker's a great game.
That's a great game. This isn't. But I think if you have that 90s nostalgia, this game is cool as hell.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people talk about it. And it's hard for me to say it's great, but it is so fun. I really like the game, and maybe it's because I rented it so much.
Well, and also, if you're a fan of Michael Jordan, you're going to be a fan of this game.
And this is pre-Space Jam. This guy's on his own adventure before he goes to another adventure.
Well, you got to start somewhere, and this is where he started.
Yeah.
Now moving on to another game that released in November. November, big year for the Super Nintendo. I think they're pushing. They're getting ready for the holidays because we have a bunch of holiday-related releases coming out in December. This game is incredible. The whole franchise is incredible.
Yeah.
Pocky and Rocky 2.
Yeah.
If you're a fan of the Pocky and Rocky series, this game is great. It's just a really cool top-down kind of run-and-gun shmup-esque game. The Pocky and Rocky series is very unique. It is. It's so fun. But they're really hard, which I love. These games are fantastic. We have the Pocky and Rocky collection on the Switch, which was badass. This is a big deal. Yeah, then we'll jump to December. Yes. And this is you would think this is a multi-plat game, but it's not. The Adventures of Batman and Robin. This game's fantastic. And the reason this is on here is this
version of the game is a console exclusive. Now, there is a game that has the same name on the Genesis, but it's completely different.
Way different.
But it's great in its own right.
Yes, they're both incredible.
This version on the Super Nintendo is a single-player experience, and it's just a beat-em up, and it's really, really good.
Yes. The Genesis version is co-op, so that's pretty badass.
And it's that one's more of a beat-em up meets a run and gun, like kind of a Contra vibe.
It is a very...
on the Genesis version.
Yeah, but the Super Nintendo version is incredible.
Yeah.
And if you love Batman, and if you it's a great Batman entry.
For sure.
I'm not going to say that it's as good as the Sunsoft Batman game, but it's still really good.
Yeah, they were right in the pocket with this game. This game is fantastic. There is another Batman game, Batman Returns on Super Nintendo, that I would probably pick over this ever so slightly.
Yes.
But this game in '94 is a fucking ripper.
And then we got two more games we want to talk about in the game section of this, and these are both combo games. This next game we're going to talk about, you could only get in a packet. It only came in the console bundle.
Yep.
But it was released in 1994, and that's the Super Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World Combo Pack. So a lot of people know of Super Mario All-Stars.
Which came out in '93.
Yeah, great game, awesome. Oh, it's so cool, nostalgia, different maps. But then this is that game plus Super Mario World packed in.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It is indeed, and in December, what a better thing to pack in with a console.
Yeah.
As, you know, what games do I get my kid? I just buy this bundle.
Yep.
And they've got the newest Mario and all the old school stuff.
So what's cool is they're pushing, like, oh, if you didn't get into the Super Nintendo, now's a great time to get into the Super Nintendo, because you can get these classic games all in one bundle.
Yep.
It's fantastic. And then the last game we're going to talk about, we have at CIB, is the Tetris and Dr. Mario Combo Pack. These are obviously both NES games, but it's super cool it was released on Super Nintendo as a combo.
A little bit of a refresher with the skins. It feels modern when you play it.
It feels a little bit modern.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like you're just playing the originals per se.
But it is cool, like they're releasing these combos and stuff. Like that's really badass.
It's like, hey, in case you missed it, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, here you go. It came out in December, you know?
Lloyd Christmas.
Yeah. What's wild is, of all the games we talked about today, obviously there's a ton of others. 5 of the games we talked about today were on the Super Nintendo Classic. That's a quarter of the games on the Super Nintendo Classic.
Yeah.
So, 1994, a quarter. That just shows how good this year was.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And, we did kind of break the mold of how we did the 90 episode for the NES. And we did talk about some multi-plats and things like that throughout this list. But we did not bring up, which was really important at the time, I would probably rather play most of these games on the Genesis, but EA Sports stuff, guys.
Yes.
Your Madden 95, your NHL 95, I'd rather play NHL 94, but NHL 95, your Lives. There were so many other games that came out that people were hyped about.
Yeah.
Like, we're just talking a lot of, like, console exclusive stuff here, but we can't forget about that type of stuff. I think there was even a Mortal Kombat game that came out.
Yeah.
Maybe the second one?
I don't know exactly, but I think there was a Shaq Fu Super Adventure Island 2. There's a lot of amazing games. NHL 94, you think would be 94, but it came out in 93 because that's how sports games work.
Yeah.
Incredible freaking year. And NHL 94, arguably one of the best hockey games ever released, which I think helps push 94 into being one of the best years, because that game was released and then it is probably still being sold.
Yeah.
94.
And another thing I want to talk about that we didn't put in the games, but Sega was pissing around, and I'm not trying to shit on Sega because I love the Genesis, okay? But they were monkeying around with attachments like the Sega CD, things like that. And Nintendo, I can't remember, was it July-ish, comes out with the Super Game Boy.
Dude, this is incredible. This is a big deal because you can play your Game Boy games on the TV.
Yeah.
With a Super Nintendo controller. You're like, what? That's incredible. And also, Sega was trying to do really cool things, but you needed all this. Like, this, you don't even need power. You don't have to plug it in.
Yeah.
Boom. It's a cartridge. It's just, this is simple.
Yeah.
Nintendo classic.
And, simultaneously, they started releasing Game Boy games that were enhanced for this device.
Yes.
But that doesn't eliminate your old Game Boy games. There is not a retro gamer in 2023 that has a Super Nintendo collection that probably doesn't have this freaking thing.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Fantastic. It's in our Super Nintendo right now, and this is the Super Nintendo we pulled off the shelf because we play it in 2023.
And I love the Game Boy, but I never turn on my Game Boy because I have this.
Yeah.
And You wouldn't, because that Game Boy, the original screen, unless you get it modded in a backlit screen and all that thing sucks. You know, just the screen. The console doesn't suck. There's so many great Game Boy games. This is just coming out in '94. We cannot, and it's not the Sega CD. It's not the 32X. No, we're just gonna give you something real simple here.
Dude.
Pop it in. Stick your Game Boy games in.
And it
what do we have in
works.
here? Fortified Zone? That's a hidden gem
Nice.
Game Boy game right there.
Dude, but it's so cool you brought it up earlier that they, once this released, started releasing Game Boy games that were enhanced. So you can still play it on your Game Boy, but then when you plug it into this, there's extra stuff.
Extra color, yeah.
That's really cool.
Very cool.
Like, you're adding things to hardware only for this piece of hardware.
Yeah.
You know, like that's wild, but really cool. And then also in '94, I just want to mention it real quick. It's not as a big deal as this, but they also released the Super Nintendo exercise bike.
Oh!
I don't know anybody that's had this. I've never seen it in person before. I think it was a very small thing.
Isn't that the only thing that used the port on the bottom of the Super Nintendo?
I've never
think-
seen it in action, dude. I don't
think
know
it
how.
is, and I think
And
that
I don't even know
port-
what is it. What games are used?
Well, I think there's just one. I think it's like a downhill. We'll put some shit on the screen and show you. But I'm pretty confident there's a port on the bottom of the Super Nintendo that they had a vision maybe of releasing a CD-based attachment. But I think the only thing that ever utilized that was that mountain
That's
bike
so
game.
weird. So they developed for something and then didn't get released, and the thing it did release was.
Yeah.
This is, dude. The exercise bike is kind of like their early things into like Wii Fit and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, video games, you know,
They're
healthy.
bad for us.
Yeah, let's be healthy.
They're not anymore.
'94, incredible
Was.
freaking year.
Now, I do want to circle back on something that I alluded to a little earlier in the episode that I'd talk about it a little bit more. Power Fest '94.
Yes.
Now, this doesn't have the buzz around it, like, for whatever reason, of the World Championships. Everybody remembers the initial
Yeah,
Nintendo
the
World
Nintendo
Championships.
World Championships was a big deal. That was in '90. We talked about
Yeah.
that in the last episode. But this is the continuation of that, but upgraded for the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
The Nintendo Power Fest '94. It involves Super Mario Kart, Super Mario All Stars, and we talked about this earlier. Home Run Derby in Ken Griffey Jr.'s baseball.
That tells you
how big that game was
and how much they were behind that.
Yeah, they were pushing it,
I love that the Home Run Derby was a part of that.
dude.
And who doesn't love even a shitty ass baseball game, which we have played? Frank Thomas Big Hurt Baseball. We occasionally just throw it in and say, hey, let's play some Home Run Derby.
Home Run Derby is such a fun
Yeah.
thing to add to baseball games.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to be a fan of baseball to enjoy Home Run Derby.
Yeah, if you don't like hitting home runs in a video game, that's a you problem.
Yeah, dude, it's so fun.
But Power Fest '94.
But the fact that like that's one of the competitive games
Yeah.
that hit home runs,
Yeah.
that is awesome.
yeah,
dude.
I'm sure there were some real scientific gamers at that were like, you're gonna make me do this.
Yeah, they're like all calculated. They're like, yeah, I've been playing Tetris, and it's like, okay, hit some home runs now.
Yeah,
Good luck.
yeah, for sure. '94 was awesome. It was awesome all the way around. You know, music, movies, the whole 9 yards. And there are so many great years on the Super Nintendo. But 1994,
Yeah.
in our humble opinion, is the cream of the crop. And there was a lot of competition on the scene that we're going to dive into in the next episode on this series.
That's gonna be fun. Can't wait for that.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Let us know what your favorite year in the comment section below was on the Super Nintendo. It's hard to compete with '94.
It is, dude.
Good luck, Chuck. We'll see you on the next, right here on the one and only Gaming Off the Grid.